cloud that had been gathering through ages of apostasy and rebellion, now black with woe, was about to burst upon a guilty people. And he, who alone could save them from their impending fate, had been slighted, abused, rejected, and was soon to be crucified. When Christ should hang upon the cross of Calvary, Israel's day as a nation favored and blessed of God would be ended. The loss of even one soul is a calamity infinitely outweighing the gains and treasures of a world. But as Christ looked upon Jerusalem, the doom of a whole city, a whole nation was before him. That city, that nation, which had once been the chosen of God, his peculiar treasure. Prophets had wept over the apostasy of Israel and the terrible dissolutions by which their sins were visited. Jeremiah wished that his eyes were a fountain of tears, that he might weep day and night for the slain of the daughter of his people, for the Lord's flock that was carried away captive. What, then, was the grief of him whose prophetic glance took in not years, but ages? He beheld the destroying angel with sword uplifted against the city which had so long been Jehovah's dwelling place. From the ridge of Olivet, the very spot afterward occupied by Titus and his army, he looked across the valley upon the sacred courts and porticos, and with tear-dimmed eyes he saw in awful perspective the walls surrounded by alien hosts. He heard the tread of armies marshalling for war. He heard the voice of mothers and children crying for bread in the besieged city. He saw her holy and beautiful house, her palaces and towers given to the flames, and where once they stood, only a heap of smoldering ruins. Looking down the ages, he saw the covenant people like wrecks on a desert shore, and the temporal retribution about to fall upon her children. He saw but the first draught from that cup of wrath, which at the final judgment she must drain to its dregs. Divine pity, yearning love, found utterance in the mournful words, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them which are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not. Oh, that thou, a nation favored above every other, hast known the time of thy visitation and the things that belong unto thy peace. I have stayed the angel of justice. I have called thee to repentance, but in vain. It is not merely servants, delegates, and prophets whom thou hast refused and rejected, but the Holy One of Israel, thy Redeemer. If thou art destroyed, thou alone art responsible. Ye will not come to me, that ye might have life. Christ saw in Jerusalem a symbol of the world hardened in unbelief and rebellion, and hastening on to meet the retributive judgments of God, the woes of a fallen race, pressing upon his soul, forced from his lips that exceeding bitter cry. He saw the record of sin traced in human misery, tears, and blood. His heart was moved with infinite pity for the afflicted and suffering ones of earth. He yearned to relieve them all. But even his hand might not turn back the tide of human woe. Few would seek their only source of help. He was willing to pour out his soul unto death to bring salvation within their reach. But few would come to him that they might have life. The majesty of heaven in tears. The Son of the infinite God, troubled in spirit, bowed down with anguish. The scene filled all heaven with wonder. That scene reveals to us the exceeding sinfulness of sin. It shows how hard a task it is, even for infinite power, to save the guilty from the consequences of transgressing the law of God. Jesus, looking down to the last generation, saw the world involved in a deception similar to that which caused the destruction of Jerusalem. The great sin of the Jews was their rejection of Christ. The great sin of the Christian world would be their rejection of the law of God, the foundation of his government in heaven and earth. The precepts of Jehovah would be despised and set at naught. Millions in bondage to sin, slaves of Satan, doomed to suffer the second death, would refuse to listen to the words of truth in their day of visitation. Terrible blindness, strange infatuation.
Yeah, we can start. I would like to introduce our today's guest, Professor Shaul Stampfer from Hebrew University.
Good evening. About 10 years ago, an article was published in an Israeli journal asking, did the Khazars really convert to Judaism? And the article was very interesting, but very poorly written. It was a bad article, even though it was interesting. The question of the lecture is, Are the Jews descendants of the Khazars? And the sad news is that they are not. I'm Jewish. I would be very happy to say that my great-great-grandfather was a warrior who rode the horses on the steppes of Asia. But I have to admit the truth. My great-great-grandfather was probably a tailor, and also his son, and also his grandson. The conclusion is not as interesting as how we can decide who are the ancestors from 1,000 years ago. Now, if most of the Jews today, or the Jews descended from Polish Jews, were Khazars, then we have to ask, what is the evidence? Now, I can tell you very clearly that there is no evidence, no source that the Jews of Poland were descended from the Khazars. How can I say this? We are at the Museum of Polish Jewish History and Culture. Go to the museum. There is nothing there. If there was real evidence, it would be there, and I would not be here. So there is no real text found in Poland saying that I am a Khazar Jew who came here, or a report. However, the idea has spread, and for actually an interesting reason. Until the Holocaust or the World War, there were millions of Jews in Poland. They had to come from somewhere. And there are many people who said, where could so many Jews have come from? The number of Jews in Germany and the Czech lands was limited. If they came from somewhere, it had to be from somewhere else. There were many Jews in the Khazar lands, and the Jews of Poland probably are descended of refugees who came to the West. Poland is the West. Yes? This is the Khazar kingdom disappeared at the end of the 10th century. And it existed for a while before then. We're talking about 1,000 years ago, a little more than 1,000 years. One of them is Yiddish. Yiddish as a language, like every language, is not only a language that people speak, but it is a history book. You can look at the language and learn about the history of the people who speak the language. We don't know very much about the Khazar language. How do you translate very much? That's what professors use when they don't know anything. They don't like to say they don't know anything, but we don't. We have no written text from the Khazars. But considering the region and the time, it seems to be clear that the Khazars were a Turkic people. So that this makes it very difficult to claim that there were many refugees from the Khazar kingdom who came and to the west. Then one can look in an additional field, and that is the field of prayers. Now, there are different traditions of prayers in the Jewish world. One style of prayer is typical for Ashkenazim, and that is for Germany, France, and Eastern Europe, Poland, Ukraine. And there is another tradition of prayers which is typical for Turkey, Greece, and Egypt. What people sometimes say the Sephardic tradition, but it's not from Spain, it's from the Orient. Now, if the Khazars converted to Judaism, who converted them? Because the land of the Khazars is near the Black Sea, so that whoever converted them would have been rabbis from Byzantium, which means that they would have had the Oriental tradition of prayers. But if you look in the prayers of Polish Jews, there is nothing of this. It does come in, but only very recently and because of Hasidism. But historically, there is no echo of Eastern Oriental prayers and traditions. In the Oriental world, Jews had more than one wife, 2 wives, 3 wives. You don't have that in Poland at all, for good reasons. I will start with the sources that we don't have. We have a letter written by the king of the Khazars. That's a very good source. The king of the Khazars writes a letter to a Jew in Spain, and he writes that my great-great-great-grandfather, 10 generations back, had a dream that God was not happy with him, and he had this dream over and over, and he started to worship God, but God was not happy again, and he decided that he would find the true faith. So he invited representatives of the Jews, of the Christians, and of the Muslims, and they had a debate, and he couldn't figure out which person was right. But then he saw that the Christians honored the Jews and the Muslims honored the Jews. So being democratic, he decided the Jews are probably correct, and he became Jewish.
In the 6th century, they were one of the Turkic family which established the Khazariya Khaganate in 7th century due to the fall of the Western Göktürk. In the 8th century, many of the Khazars who practiced shamanism finally converted to Judaism. The Khazars have a good relationship with the Byzantine Empire, but having conflicts with the Arabian. Until the 9th century, the Pekineg ethnic invaded the Khazariya Empire. This makes the Khazarians turn weaker. The Khazariya Empire falls when the Kiev and Rus ethnic, under Volodymyr the Great, which is also defeated the Volga Bulgars. After the fall, the Khazar finally disappeared from the history. However, is that really the Khazars disappeared after the fall? There were some theories that may help us to determine where are the Khazars now. Some theories stated that the Khazars were not disappeared. Instead, they're migrating to the west and forming the parts of the core of the Ashkenazi Jews population in Europe. According to an Israeli-born genetist, Aaron L. Haik, he found that the Ashkenazi Jews are the European Jews. They only have 3% similarity compared with ancient ancestors, which connected them with the other ethnics in the Middle East. This means that the DNA of the Ashkenazi Jews can be detected from an ancient Ashkenazi. Some Ashkenazis converted to Judaism before migrating to the Middle East for establishing a Jew country there. According to Aaron, an Asian DNA is also found in an Ashkenazi Jews. So it can be determined that an Asian DNA is actually the Khazar DNA, which converted to Judaism. Therefore, it was said that the Khazar Jews have been absorbed into the Ashkenazi Jews. This means that the Khazars were only disappeared from the history, but not for their people. Some of the Khazars also assimilated with Turkic and humans. There were some figures which possibly the Khazars that have been absorbed into the Ashkenazi Jews, such as Karl Marx, Albert Einstein, Adolf Hitler, Mark Zuckerberg, and many more.
There's so much more meaning to the Star of David than just a Jewish symbol represented on the Israeli flag. The six-pointed star holds mystical and occult secrets that transcend religion, ethnicity, and culture. And this is the muse of our next guest. Please welcome David Block of Flying in the Wind. Hello, hello. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Fellow skier, speaking of flying in the winds,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So tell us how you went from the high Alps of France to Israel to America to doing the Jewish star and Israeli flag in your day-to-day life.
Well, I grew up in a Jewish family, always in a Zionist environment. I was very involved with the Jewish community while growing up, and also in college in Massachusetts, joining AIPAC and many different organizations. And then I met Aliyah 18 years ago.
Amazing. So was this something that always fascinated you? Was the Jewish star just something you remember liking as a child?
The Star of David, the flag
Or
of
the
Israel.
Jewish star. I'm calling it the Star of David, Jewish
Sure.
star, Magen David,
Magen David.
everything. There's so many names for it.
So the Israeli flag was always a sense of pride, of hope for me, because I always knew I was going to make Aliyah, even before the Bar Mitzvah, and
Wow.
I made it much after. But
you knew.
Excuse me?
But you knew. It was
I
just
knew
one of
it,
those
and
things.
I was always drawing as a kid, and then, with my son Nadav, we used to draw when he was about 2 or 3 years old. When he started drawing, he also started drawing Israeli flags, and we went on doing this, and that's how I started.
So how did you come up with this many variations? Does it just come to you?
I used the flag of Israel as a canvas, as a tool for expression, especially in the last 4 years where I had a very difficult period of my life. It kind of helped me, together with writing, to express what I was feeling, my pains, my sorrows, my hope. And that's what I did.
So the flag is, so the symbol is something that you will always go to, like to bring you hope at times that are more challenging?
It's always a positive thing. After the history of the Jewish people, for me, I look at the flag and I say everything is possible and everything is forever, and go for it.
Yeah. So how does it work? Is it all kind of the same materials that you use to make your creations? How do you do it? How do you go about the process?
Well, first of all, I have ideas, and I sometimes visualize it, and I draw it, hand draw it first, and then I scan it, and I color everything on the computer, and then I improve. And sometimes I just do it by hand collage, and yes, it depends.
Whatever you're feeling, you're feeling in the moment. Now, also, so you have an exhibit now that just is. Tell us where it is and how people could go see it.
Studio Shuki Cook, Ruchama 11, and Mitran Noga. Not too far from your studios.
So you were able to walk here.
I actually ran to come here. The opening was just a few hours ago. So, yes.
So also, let's talk about just the the Magen David in general. It's just just if you look at the history of it, there's so many there's so much history, which I find interesting because we're used to seeing it this way, and we think of it as being referred to as the Jewish star. But there's so much. It transcends religion. It was used by Hindu, all kinds of the symbol. How did what have you been able to learn about the symbol as a universal?
Well, maybe a lot, not enough. Maybe about different other culture as far as the use of the Magen David. But I went much more into the depth of Judaism with it, and it's like
in the meanings
in parallel,
of it, and
yes.
the meanings of it in general. So do you think that they'd ever be open here to kind of amending the flag and adding, a new style?
I don't think that. We shouldn't. I mean, this
No,
is
I mean,
just
we don't
perfect.
want to do that to Herzl. I mean, I love this quote.
Simple is good.
And I love this quote that was included in your, the information that you sent, but that he had said in 1895, what is a flag? It's not just a cloth hung on a pole. People live for it. They are killed over it. The flag is the only thing for which men are ready to die for. So, and if you think about it, you've lived in so many different places. Is this the only flag that you feel, connected to?
Well, I feel connected to different other flags. I have, French, Norwegian, Czech, and Swiss origins.
And
so,
American, right.
and I lived in America for many years, so I actually started working on different other flags, but for now it's the Israeli flag. That's most of my
your
work.
flag.
Yes, that's my flag.
Fantastic. Well, good luck with the exhibit, and how long can people come see it?
So they can come every day from 9 to 5 in the afternoon, from Sundays to Thursdays at Studio Shukikuk.
The Goldrich. Find out more by visiting his website, link in the description. Most Jews recognize the Star of David as a symbol of Judaism. Some would argue it's the symbol. Today, the Star of David is practically ubiquitous in the Jewish world. It's even an emoji. The most iconic use of the star might be on the Israeli flag, but the Star of David wasn't always a universal symbol for Judaism. What's the history behind how two overlapping triangles came to be the most universally recognizable symbol associated with Judaism? The answer goes back centuries, and it's surprisingly complicated. In ancient times, the Star of David, or the Magen David, wasn't an exclusively Jewish symbol. It was a common geometric symbol, just like the 5-point star and even the swastika. The oldest record of the 6-point star as a Jewish symbol was around the 2nd or 3rd century. Archaeologists found stars of David on the walls of the Synagogue of Capernaum near the Sea of Galilee. But most experts think that these stars and those found elsewhere in the early Common Era were used for decorative purposes and didn't hold any significant Jewish meaning. Nearly a century later, the star appeared on the now famous Leningrad Codex, the oldest known manuscript of the Hebrew Bible dating from 1008 CE. However, it's unclear if it was used merely for decoration or possibly had a deeper religious purpose. Experts like German-Israeli academic and philosopher Gershom Scholem theorize that the star gained more meaning in Judaism in the mysterious teachings of the Kabbalah. The 13th and 14th centuries saw a growing movement of Jewish sages in Spain, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East, writing Kabbalistic texts that explored the foundations of Jewish mysticism. These texts were the first sources to ascribe meaning to the 6-point star. The Book of Boundary, written in Spain in the early 14th century, contains several depictions of the 6-point star, where it's identified as being on the Shield of David, a reference to the legendary protective shield used by King David, which, according to legend, had magical powers and could ward off spirits and demons. Other works of the time make similar references to the king's magical amulet with a 6-point star emblazoned on it. But the earliest known particularly Jewish usage of the Star of David wasn't tied to a Kabbalah scholar. In the mid-14th century, Holy Roman Emperor Charles IV gave Prague's Jews the right to bear a flag. Under the red flag, with the yellow Star of David on it, Prague was the world's first Jewish community to use the star as its official emblem. The Star of David was on flags and books in Prague at the time and in surrounding Jewish communities, but it didn't go viral until the 18th century. It started in Europe, where everywhere Jews looked, they saw the symbol of Christianity, the cross. Seeking to find their own distinctly Jewish symbol, communities turned to the Star of David. This struck a chord with diaspora Jews and spread to synagogues across the world. The star was cemented as the Jewish symbol in 1897 at the First Zionist Congress in Basel, which was chaired by Theodor Herzl. There, the Star of David was chosen over icons like the menorah as the official Zionist symbol for two reasons. Jews everywhere already knew it, thanks to the widespread use of the star during the 19th century, when it became splashed on synagogues, prayer books, tombstones, and the stationery of Jewish charitable organizations all over. The second reason was that it didn't have the religious significance of other symbols. By the mid-20th century, no symbol was more tied to Judaism. Zionist leaders embraced this. It didn't evoke memories of the past, they argued, and could represent a brighter future. To pervert the symbol of the Jewish people, Hitler decreed that all Jews under the Third Reich wear a yellow 6-point star badge of shame. The yellow Star of David is one of the most enduring images of the Holocaust. But the Jews who survived would not let Hitler decide their symbol's legacy, and on the heels of World War II, they reclaimed their star. The State of Israel was established, and the debate began over what emblem would be featured on the young nation's flag. The flag of the Zionist movement already had strong support, but Israeli politicians like Minister of Foreign Affairs Moshe Sharet had reservations. He and others feared that Jewish communities in the diaspora could face dual loyalty charges if the flags of the Zionist movement and the Israeli flag were the same. Therefore, in June of 1948, the Israeli government's designated committee announced a public competition calling for flag designs. Though it wasn't a requirement, entries were encouraged to include the 7 gold stars, a design dreamed up by Herzl and sketched in his diary in the late 19th century. During the 2-week-long competition, 164 people participated, submitting a total of 450 designs. While deciding on the final design, Sharet wanted input from the diaspora, so he reached out to Zionist leaders abroad. The response was clear. They and their constituents overwhelmingly preferred to have the Zionist flag become Israel's national flag. And on October 28, 1948, the Provisional Council voted unanimously to adopt the Zionist flag as that of the State of Israel. The history of the Star of David as a symbol is rich and complex. Many view it today as an enduring symbol of Jewish pride and perseverance throughout the world. Institutions across the globe display and commission art installations that examine the star's history, from JCCs, synagogues, and museums, to other iconic institutions like the Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba, Israel.
The center of Kabbalah, and by that I mean an ancient mystic stream of Judaism, not this place in LA. At the center of Kabbalah is a book called the Zohar, which is a book that collects knowledge from even older Jewish mystical works. It looks at verses in the Bible and ideas in Judaism through the lens of the 10 Sfirot. Put simply, each of these Sfirot is a way to interact with an aspect of God. Through these Sfirot, the Zohar created new ways to think about lots of the Bible and really to think about Judaism in general, mystical ways. Now, the Zohar was written in the 13th century in a culture where there was both intellectual curiosity and deep religious fervor. In this culture, this was in northern Spain, on one hand, they were influenced by the teachings of Maimonides, who was a Jewish thinker with a Greek philosophical perspective. So he said, you can't ever know what God does, just what God doesn't do. In other words, you shouldn't ever assume God's actions have a direct effect on you. It's an intellectual way to approach God. And then they were influenced by Christian Europe's religious fervor. God has a direct effect on me. So how can God simultaneously have an effect and not have an effect? Mysticism's answer is there are multiple aspects to God. We can't interact with God, who is unknowable, let's say the Ein Sof, but we can interact with 10 constricted aspects of God, the Sfirot. A small group of people wrote about this in 13th century northern Spain. One was Nachmanides in his interpretations of the Torah, and the other was Moshe de Leon, who collected older texts that formed into the Zohar. These older texts focused on trying to understand some difficult sections in the Bible, like the logic behind creation, or the chariot vision of Ezekiel, the apocalyptic visions of Daniel. Notably, only a small group of scholars read any of the Kabbalistic texts, including the Zohar, as it was generally accepted that studying them might drive you mad. That is, until 250 years later. So, 60 years after the Spanish Inquisition, Isaac Luria in Spot entered the picture. To greatly generalize, at this time, Jews were in a down place. The whole focus of the religion was on living in the past and being sad about where we are now, not in Spain having fun. Luria had this revelatory idea to take the principles of Kabbalism found in the Zohar and evolve them. Instead of it mostly being about understanding the Sfirot, Kabbalism was now about collecting sparks. Luria said the world was originally a perfect vessel, but it was destroyed and it's up to us to collect all of the pieces. Each time we do a good deed, we're collecting these sparks and taking another step towards the Messiah. For instance, the way a person held a Kiddush cup could create a spark, as holding it in a certain way showed off God's name. Lots of traditions Jews do to this day were created by Luria and people that followed him. Kabbalat Shabbat, for instance. So with Luria, instead of being sad about the past, suddenly Judaism was about looking towards the future and the hope of salvation by the Messiah. And these thoughts were wildly popular. It got people to follow many more traditions, and it significantly spread Kabbalah. it continued to grow until it brought about the Messiah. It brought about someone who claimed to be the Messiah, and this threw a major wrench in people's faith in the movement. So the story continues with this guy Shabtai Tzvi. He was a false Messiah. He was a person who almost brought down Judaism.